Well, thank you for tuning in for the second episode of Walking Through Rogers Past. We're going to spend a little bit more time talking about Rogers' time in the Great Depression. We started talking 1926 to 1936. We'll spend a little bit more time talking about that, just some of the conditions in which he grew up in, and we'll jump right into it.
Okay. First of all, I want to tell you that I have macular degeneration, and I had my eye shots today. I've had my 100th eye shot, which has taken place over the last 8 years. Every 6 weeks I get a shot in my eye, so I can't see anything, but I can hear, and we'll go from there. After our first episode, I was thinking about different things from the depression that I hadn't covered in our first episode. And a couple of things is we didn't have any credit cards or debit cards, and we didn't have any money, but the local grocers and the people in the regular stores and the meat market extended credit, and they would have a big pile of books entering all your debits. And then later on, my mother would give me 50 cents and say, go down to the meat market and get 25 cents for the hamburger and put 25 cents on the bill. And that's how we paid our bills.
How much meat could you get for 25 cents?
Well, you'd get a pound of meat, like a Model T Ford was $100. So things were a lot different. And you also asked me what I did for entertainment. And I built lots of kites. I would go to the lumber yard and any place that gave yardsticks at Christmas, and a yardstick made a perfect wood for making a kite. I'd cut it down the black line and use the wide one for the mainstay and the narrow one for the crosspiece. And then I'd go to the local department store and talk them into giving me some paper. And I would make paste out of flour and water to glue the paper together and put string around it. And then I would ask my mother for any clothes she wasn't using so I could rip it up into rags and have a tail on my kite. And we had fun making kites. I also made box kites. Box kites were square kites about 4 feet high and 2 feet square. And most of the time they flew. So we had a lot of fun with that. Another thing we did for excitement is go fishing. The Onion River was about a mile from our house, where we would pack up our bamboo pole and a sandwich of homemade bread and walk down to the river and fish bullheads and come home and have a good day. We also made a lot of slingshots, and we made good slingshots. We'd go down to the creek bottom in the spring and look for a somewhat perfect crotch, and then we would alter that crotch growth with pieces of wood and string and come back 6 months later or the next year, and by that time you had a perfect crutch for your and then we'd go down to the local filling station and get a used truck tire for the rubbers, and we'd get string. And I really got in trouble. I took the tongue out of my dad's work shoe to make for putting the ammunition in. That didn't go over very good.
But did it work?
Oh yeah, it worked perfect, but
what was your ammunition?
Oh, you go and pick up the round stones off the road. The rounder stones, the better. And I could shoot sparrows, and so
really?
I was pretty good with a slingshot. I made a lot of them.
How much glass did you break?
I also learned how to fix windows. I did that with a BB gun. I broke the neighbor's window, and my dad said, "You broke it, you fix it." So I took the window out and took the pane out and took the putty out, went to the hardware store and got a piece of glass to fit and got a can of putty and the glazing points. And so when I was 8 years old, I was fixing windows. Let's see, what else can we do? We didn't have any money for ice cream and soda water, so we made our own soda water. We made cream soda water and root beer. I don't know how we made it, but it didn't have much zip to it, but that was what we had to drink. And soap, we made soap for laundry. I was trying to figure out how we made it. I know my mom bought a can of Eagle Eye, and I thought she used rendering some cooking for the oils for saponification. And you cooked it on the stove and put it in a big cake pan. And then when the soap was hardening, right before it was real hard, you take a knife and make bar designs in it And then on Sunday night, we would take a bar of soap and take our food grater and grate this soap for soap in the morning. And that took dirt out of everything. It looked like Fells-Naphtha soap. And we didn't have any hot water for washing in the summer. So they had a little cook stove in the basin with a 30-gallon oval copper tank on it. Fill that up with water and light the furnace or light the little stove, and that's how we got our hot water for washing. So it was quite an experience to make do on these things, but that's what we did to save money.
You talked about making soda. What did you have for refrigeration or ice?
Oh, we had an ice box. It was a yellow ice box, and the iceman would come around once a week with his horse-drawn a wagon and bring a cube of ice to put in the ice box. That's what you had. Before we had that, we took our milk and put it downstairs by the water faucet, if we had water in the system, and let the water drip on the top of the milk bottle to keep it cold. And I never had store-bought bread until I graduated from high school. My mother baked bread every Saturday. And by Friday of the next week, it got pretty dry, but she baked the bread, and we buy a 50-pound sack of Pillsbury flour. Had a big flour bin in the house. I remember putting the flour in that bin and seeing the puff of powder coming out of it. And that's what we used for baking bread. And she could bake bread. But like I said, by Friday, it got kind of dry because they didn't have any of the chemical additives to keep it fresh. But we had a good time, and we had lots of love. And
my son asked me earlier tonight about bean pie. Have you ever heard of bean pie?
No, no.
He said they made it out of lima beans or other types of beans. It was popular in the late 1930s. I didn't think that sounded very good.
I made some good bean casseroles up here, but I never heard of bean pie.
What types of desserts did your mother make?
She baked some pies. We didn't have much dessert either. She'd can peaches. We'd have canned peaches. She'd always buy Freestone peaches, and they were really good peaches. And she would steam them, peel them, cut them in half, and put them in jars. And the mason jars we had in those days had a rubber gasket on it. It didn't have the seal type tops that we have nowadays. But you put the rubber gasket on and turn the cover real tight, and that would be a seal. And it worked pretty good for canning beans and canning lots of tomatoes. And I told you about the potato bin. So we had plenty of food. I wouldn't say plenty of food to eat, but we had enough food. My mother was known as a very generous person, and I don't know if you ever heard about hobos.
Yeah.
You know the hobos? We had men that rode the rails that came through Cedarville, and they knew where 130 Wisconsin Avenue was, because they would come there and ask for a meal. And I remember my mother saying, we don't have room at the table, but you can sit in the back hall here on the step. There was 3 steps going into the house, and I'll give you a plate of food. We don't have much, but we'll make enough to give you a meal. And I can remember one of the hobos saying, God bless you, lady. And then my dad was the fire chief. He had access to the firehouse, which had heat in it. And my mother would give my dad a pair of knitted socks. They were mostly knit. She would knit all of his socks. After they had a hole in, she'd knit the heel. She said, let him sleep in the firehouse tonight and put this pair of socks alongside of him. So she had lots of friends, and next year, the same guy would come back, or somebody else that got the word that 130 Wisconsin Avenue, you could get a meal. Isn't that something?
Yeah. What did you mentioned her fixing the socks. What did you do for clothes? Did she make a lot of your clothes growing up?
I wore some of my sister's clothes, not dresses, but shoes and so forth. And when we had a hole in our sole of our shoe, we wouldn't get a new pair of shoes. You could buy soles in the hardware store with rubber cement, and you'd smear them full of rubber cement and put a new sole on your shoe. And that would take care of you for another couple of years.
Until you outgrew them lengthwise. Right?
Yeah. And I started school when I was 5. If you were 5 before December 31st, you could start school. So I was one of the youngest in my class because my birthday was December 14th.
How did you get to school?
Jumped across the creek and went across the cemetery and there was school. It was 2.5 blocks away. And I would come home. We didn't have any school lunch program. I would come home for lunch and get a piece of homemade bread. And
So they'd let you leave school at 5 years old.
yes. Well, it was a small town and nobody was gonna.
So what was the school like then?
The school?
Yeah.
Well, we had desks with an inkwell. You probably remember the type of desk we had. You could put your books in it, lift up the top, and had an inkwell. We didn't have ink. We were in the first grade, of course.
Was it multiple grades in one classroom?
No. We had first and second, third and fourth, fifth and sixth, and seventh and eighth. We had 4 rooms. And Miss Detman when I was a freshman, Miss Hewley when I was a sophomore, and Miss Larmer when I was a 5th and 6th grade, Miss Litke when I was in 7th and 8th. A good story of Miss Litke. She was, of course, the school nurse, doctor, and everything else. And Doris Vanderwater fell off the giant strides one day and hurt her arm. And she was crying, and Miss Litke said to me, "You hold her arm. We have to measure her arm to see if it's broke." So she measured, this is a true story. She measured her arm and she measured the other arm. She said, same length, not broken. The next day she came to school with a cast on both arms. That's actually a true story.
That is hilarious. So what was the playground equipment?
Oh, we had giant strides.
What is that? I'm not familiar.
Giant strides, they'd have a center post and they would have a Lazy Susan type deal on the top with chains attached to it. And then it would have something you could grab your hands on, and then you run and take your feet off the ground and swing, and the whole thing would go around. So you can get 10 people on there, and it would be quite exciting.
Until you fell off and broke both your arms.
Until she fell. And we had swings, and we had teeter-totter. And what else did we have?
Did they have any monkey bars or jungle gym for you guys to climb on?
Well, the framework of the swings took care of that. We had some crossbars. They were made out of like 2-inch galvanized metal.
Probably not the same safety standards on today's playground equipment.
And then we had you clean the erasers by pounding them on the side of the school, so the side of the school was white from pounding erasers on them.
Did last time we were talking, you mentioned your bicycle. What's the story with your bicycle?
Oh, I didn't have a bicycle, and my aunt said, "We have an old bicycle in the garage." So I went down and got the bicycle, and it was way out of whack. You could ride down the railroad tracks, one track, without hitting the track, one wheel on each side. So I'm telling you a true story. And I taught myself how to ride after several falls. And then I got my own bike after I worked in the beet field. I worked in the beet field when I was 10 or 12. We got 35 cents a roll for weeding red beets. You go on your hands and knees. The mother would pack me a lunch. We had about 5 fellows, 5 loads a day, $1.75 a day I earned. When I had enough money, I bought a bike at Gamble store for $32. And that was a red and white balloon tire bike. That was my bike. So then I got rid of the cross-eyed one.
Did you occasionally put your earnings towards the family funds too, or did you always get to keep it?
We never had a budget or allowance. We didn't get an allowance, so everything I wanted to spend would come out of my pocket. They didn't give me any money. I mean, even when I was in high school, I didn't have any money for even an ice cream cone when I started out. But they had a baseball machine in the local sweet shop, and in that baseball machine were baseballs and other gumballs. And if you put a penny in the machine and happened to get a baseball, you got an ice cream cone. So I either chewed gum or had ice cream. Most of the time chewed gum.
So last time we talked, you had mentioned that 1936 Lake Michigan froze over, and you said, I think that's verifiable, and I can verify that is in fact what happened. There's a local newspaper clipping that I pulled up. What did you guys do in the wintertime?
We did some ice skating, and
Homemade ice skates, or did you buy ice skates?
No, they had my dad's ice skates, the one that you turn on with a key. They fit on your, not shoe skates. They were like a roller skate, but they had clamps on them and a strap, and that's what you use for ice skates. But they weren't very stable, but that's what we used. When I was 10, I started working for a living. I worked at my uncle's farm. I got $10 a month, and I would cut thistles. I blocked sugar beets. We made hay. I drove the team of horses. You know what it is to put hay in a hay mow with a hay fork?
Oh, the hay fork. I'm used to the baled version.
Well, I got to that later, but you run into the center of the barn with your load of hay, and a hay fork would come down. And the fork was about 2 by 2, and it had tines on the bottom, and you put that in there, stepped on it, and then you pulled up the levers that pulled up those tines, and that held that whole pile of hay, whatever you could get. And then the pulleys would come down, and you hook up the team of horses, and you say, giddy up, and the horse would go out to the road, and when the hay got up to the top, it'd hit the click, and then it'd go either right or left. And then the man in the hay mow would pull the rope and drop the hay. That's how we made the hay. And we prepared the hay by cutting it and then having a dump rake. You know what a dump rake is?
Yeah.
Yeah. It would run down the field, and then you get a windrow of hay and get the wagon and pitch it all up on the wagon. I also cultivated corn with a one-row cultivator and a horse. Now this is when I was 10 and 11. And I thought it was easy to cultivate corn. I'll take this one-row cultivator and I'll get near the row and I'll raise it up and I'll wipe out the whole row. You found out that you put pressure on that side, and the cultivator will come right over. So I learned how to cultivate corn that way. And then after I worked there for a couple of years, I started working in a grocery store, I think, when I was about 14. I got 25 cents an hour, and I worked 16 and a half hours a week. And I know now why the grocer was a wealthy man. He would say every Friday, did I pay you the penny last week or this week? I get $4.12 one week and $4.13 the other week. Imagine that. And then my sister got married, and my brother-in-law was a implement salesman. He sold Case equipment, and Case came out with a sandwich-type pickup baler way back when. I think it was must have been about 1942. And they went all over the county baling hay for 9 cents a bale. And I was the crew chief when I was 15, imagine that. I drove a 28 Chev 1.5-ton truck with our wires and gasoline and grease and everything. I had to sit on a pillow. I wasn't very tall, didn't have a license. And my brother-in-law's dad drove the tractor and the baler, and we had a 12-year-old kid that tied wires. He sat next to me in the truck, and we baled hay all summer. We ate well because just like a threshing crew. They would give you pie for dinner, pie for lunch, and pie for supper. We baled a lot of hay, and I got 75 cents a day for that baling. And in the winter, we would bale hay out of mows, which was a terrible job. You'd back the baler into the barn floor, and then you would pitch hay down into the baler, and then you'd sit there with no wind. I mean, you're eating all this dust. I think that helped me live to be 99. Anyhow.
So you mentioned 1928 10.5 pickup. Do you remember your family's first vehicle?
Yes, it was a Model T Ford.
What year was it? Do you remember?
I don't know. It must have been like a 1920 or something like that.
Yeah.
And had a crank. It didn't have a starter on it. And we'd go to Grandma's house if my dad could get the car started. You go out there and crank it. And we had a big horse blanket in the back seat that my two sisters and I would crawl behind to try to keep warm. There was no heater in the car. And the Grandpa and Grandma lived about 3 miles down the road. I always had a good time there because they had a barn, and they had one cow, and they had a chicken coop, and so I could play outside while they're visiting. So
was the car completely enclosed? Was there glass all the way around?
Yes. And I think my mother said that I rotated the tires on that car when I was 6. I don't know if she was hoping that the car would fall on me or what, but
So how was it for gas stations? How did your dad get gas? Do you remember?
yeah, we had gas stations, and there were gravity gas deals. They had a glass cylinder that had gallon marks on it, and you would turn the crank and pump the gas out of the tank that was at the filling station, and then you would drain the gas out of that cylinder by gravity into the car's gas tank. So you'd go from, if you wanted 5 gallons, you pump 5 gallons into the glass and drain it all out.
And then how far away was the gas station?
The gas station was right down the block from me, and they're the ones that supplied me with all the inner tubes for slingshots. And then the next car we had was a 1928 Chev. I never was out of the state of Wisconsin until I went to the Navy.
Is that right?
Yeah. And the only vacation we ever had with the family was we went to Wisconsin Dells one day. That was a big trip. We went to Wisconsin Dells with our 1928 Chev.
Well, one question I wanted to ask you last time we didn't get to it was, you had mentioned your dad was born in 1898
Yeah.
and was right at the end of the draft class for World War I. Is that right?
Yes. Mhm.
Did he ever tell you stories about that process, or?
No, he didn't, because he wasn't in any, he didn't go overseas. He was a bugler, believe it or not. I didn't think he was any kind of musician, but they have a picture of him with a bugle, and I have a picture of him with his army uniform on. I might even include that picture if you want to. I got the,
If you have it.
yeah,
for
we
sure.
have that.
So the time when you grew up, I imagine, was there a lot of World War I veterans in the neighborhood?
See, that was World War I in 1917, 1918, and I don't remember too much about the World War I. I remember a lot about the World War II.
Sure.
Of people that got killed, veterans that came back in a casket from overseas.